Red Dead Redemption 1 on Steam Deck, so I did a comparison of the Steam Deck versus the Switch 2. So let's check it out on Steam Deck with the best settings possible, injecting upscalers, because the ones that come by default are not great. So it's marked as playable, and the only issue here is that the game's launcher setup tool may require touchscreen, so you're forced to use a Rockstar launcher. You'll have to go through it each time, but you only have to log in, I think, the first time you launch it. I was also able to play offline, so while it would be nice that it's not there, fortunately it doesn't seem to be a problem. At least it just takes longer to get into the game, which is annoying, but it doesn't make it unplayable. To inject the better upscalers, we're using this Decky plugin. It's called Decky FrameGen. You need to basically install OptiScaler using this, copy the patch command, then go into the settings of the game properties and put this command down there. That should give you what you need. There's a tutorial on how to install this in the description below. It's pretty simple and it starts from scratch, from installing Decky to finding this plugin, which is pretty easy once again. And once that mod is installed, I highly recommend going into the controller prompts and add the insert key as the R5 key, so one of the back buttons to the insert key, so we can change the upscaler from there. And I want to thank Instant Gaming for sponsoring this video. Instant Gaming is a website to get cheaper games for PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo Switch with 24/7 support. Right now you can find Clear Obscure Expedition 33 for only $30.59 US, Arc Raiders for $28.12, and even Resident Evil Requiem for $61.19 US. And the game we're playing today, Red Dead Redemption 1, unfortunately is out of stock, but you can get notified via email when they get more keys. And we're also giving away one free game to one of you guys each month on Instant Gaming. Hit participate, follow myself and Instant Gaming in social media for more chances. And thanks again to Instant Gaming for sponsoring this video. Let's continue. Alright, so for this comparison, I'm going to do FXAA versus FSR3 versus FSR4 versus XeSS. And why am I doing this? Well, the first two, FXAA and FSR3, are the in-game options. So the in-game options are at native resolution here. And the ones at the right, FSR4 and XeSS, are using OptiScaler, which again, you can find on how to use in the link in the description. So I made live-for-live footage. First of all, let's check performance. Performance, FXAA runs the best, as you can see, 76. Then FSR3, 67. FSR4 is a huge hit, 50 FPS, so we lose 17 frames over FSR3. And then XeSS is more of an in-between, 61 FPS. So it's in between FSR4 and FSR3 when it comes to performance. When it comes to sharpening, I kept the same sharpening option, 0.4 for all of them. So the sharpness, none of them will be sharpened more than the other, if that makes any sense. But I think in still images, you can already tell the difference. Already. I think it's a little bit obvious. This one at the right is a bit over sharpened though. Yeah, especially the smaller details like this guy's glasses into the distance. But again, all these are native resolution. I'm not using upscaling in this particular moment. So as you'll probably see, FSR3 is very, very soft. Then FSR4 looks fine and XeSS looks okay. And FXAA, well, you'll see a lot of instability on the image. I'm going to slow it down a bit further so it's more obvious, especially in motion with stuff into the distance that is more straight lines. I think you can notice that FXAA breaks immediately. Same thing in here. Power lines are the most obvious difference. FSR3 loses detail here. FSR4 and XeSS, no problem. Over here, FXAA, despite being native, is very unstable with those straight lines. You lose a lot of the texture on FSR3, but there's an issue with XeSS that there's more instability with heavy contrast that FSR4 resolves way better, although it's not 100% perfect. But again, these are very small details on contrast. Remember that we're talking about a 7-inch screen, so those are usually passing through and you won't notice them as much. Although FSR3 is just way too soft, I mean, even in still images, I think it's pretty obvious that, well, FSR3 is just a soft mess. XeSS is an in-between, and FSR4 looks the best. especially when it comes to these small details like power lines. The default settings for the game, I think none of these are ideal. Personally, when it comes to performance, since the hit with FSR4 is so big, I'll probably be using XeSS. I mean, the performance difference is pretty obvious, and XeSS is closer to FSR3 when it comes to the performance impact. Unstable image makes me not being able to recommend FXAA, despite that being the default option. Let's see here. Yeah, I mean, look at the amount of detail lost with FSR3 on John's jacket. Yeah, that's insane. So while XeSS is not the best, I think it's the best of both worlds. If you look at this right here, like this small fence, this railing, better said. Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious, especially when it comes to FSR3. Some stuff is lost, completely lost. I would say that's the main thing, but in comparison with FSR3, I mean, it's pretty obvious. But if you're looking at the Steam Deck, it's less than 10% of the screen. So on the smaller screen, it's not really that obvious when it comes to the XeSS instability. With that information out of the way, I think personally the best idea is to use XeSS with a dynamic resolution and dynamic sharpness, maybe. But overall, yeah, I'm pretty surprised on what you can achieve just by injecting upscalers. It's kind of crazy, especially when it comes to the smaller details. And well, it's a shame about the performance hit, but hey, it is what it is. So yeah, let's proceed with XeSS, shall we? Alright, so once you're into the game, I recommend 800p. The frame rate cap, you can put it at 60, that's what I'm targeting right now. And in the graphics, if you're on the OLED Steam Deck, you can enable HDR if you want to, medium shadows, low shadow softness for a bit more performance, shadow blend on smooth. Anti-aliasing DLSS, this option will show up once the mod is installed. This is what the mod is going to use to inject other upscalers. In this case, this is what you need, DLSS on, with quality as the resolution option. There's also dynamic resolution from here, but it's not 100% perfect. There is a lot of instability when it comes to the resolution that the game chooses when moving the camera. So quality should be good enough. Personally, don't like motion blur, so it's off. And then these sliders might look a little bit low, but if you look at it on geometry and terrain, I lowered this because otherwise we're CPU bound when entering towns, and it's pretty noticeable. Tree level of detail a little bit below, but you can put it on the maximum if you want to. Tree draw distance, 50% was good. Grass level of detail, funnily enough, if you put it on the lowest, it matches what the PS4 and Switch 2 do. And this is already more than enough grass draw distance. You can go higher, but this should give you decent enough performance. So I apply those changes, hit the insert key that I'm at behind the Steam Deck. This will open OptiScaler. And in here, hold the Steam key, and with the right trackpad, you can control this menu. Make sure to choose XeSS. Then if this wasn't the default, hit change upscaler. And when it comes to the sharpness, I highly recommend you choose a manual override at 0.3 or something like that. Just check it out by yourself. You can put a ridiculous number. And yeah, something like this. And I haven't touched motion adaptive sharpness. It works pretty well with these settings, but sometimes I just get a black screen when trying to get into the game again after relaunching. So once you're satisfied with what you put here, this FrameGen option will override the ones from the game. So once you enable FrameGen in the game as the DLSS FrameGen option, this is going to enable FrameGen. So right now it's technically disabled. After all that is done, go down here, save INI. So that will save your settings right here. Close, quit the game and get back in. All right, so now we're into the game with the settings I showed you. First thing that I will notice is that I overdid the sharpness a little bit. So let me pause. And here in the override, if you go to the highest, it's super over sharpened, obviously. So maybe 0.25, something like that. This will save in real time now because we already applied it. Okay, this is better than nothing. But the main issue with XeSS, as I showed you in the comparison, is that in very heavy contrast moments, you'll see haloing around objects. As an example, if you look at Marston, the sky contrasting with the hat, you can see that haloing. If you ever played Spider-Man 1 and 2, you'll notice it. But again, I'm basically doing an edge case over there. Let me get these bad guys, if I can. 1 down, 2 down, 3 down. Okay, 1 more, I think. Was that the draw distance was lowered almost to the minimum because of CPU limitation. So let me show you what I was talking about. When entering a town, it could even be the McFarland Ranch, which is one of the first places that you visit. It's funny because it's not the biggest town, but you can still notice that performance drop. So let's pretend I'm going at Mach 5 speed. Just look at the CPU. And the CPU gets increasingly more utilized, and it drops into the mid-50s, something like that. Well, if you're on the highest settings or even 50% resolution scale, you're going to get a drop into the 40s there, with the CPU hitting 100%, and that makes the GPU drop performance, so the frequency of the GPU will drop below 900 MHz. So what I'm trying to say is that there's GPU power to spare, but when the CPU needs juice, it's going to take that power away from the GPU. That'll make the game drop frames, unfortunately. So that's why you need to lower the draw distance. It makes the game less CPU hungry, and it will be way more consistent, especially when getting to a town on horseback. Less of a stuttery experience. You can increase the draw distance if you want to. I'm just doing this to have a more consistent experience overall, because the stuttering is very noticeable. I mean, here you can see it even with the lower draw distance. So imagine how worse it is without that tweak. Go into Blackwater, but in the base game, there's a glitch that you can exploit on this one to not having to play half of the game to get to Blackwater. And that's basically getting arrested right at the edge of tall trees, I think it's called. Okay, so once you get their attention, holster your weapon, you get arrested, and you should be warped to Blackwater. And there we go, magically in Blackwater. Of course, you're not meant to be here in this moment of the game, but this part of the city is pretty CPU heavy. If you ever played this on the PlayStation 3, that everyone was on the 360 version, once you go to Blackwater, the performance dropped into the 20s right away. Back then I didn't know about performance or anything like that. I just felt like the game felt wrong, like it was choppy. And I noticed. It was pretty obvious. I couldn't hit anything. I got used to it, but still. This area has always been notorious for that. And of course you're not meant to be here at this moment in the story, so there might be a few glitches. But I just did this to do the performance comparison. Alright, so Undead Nightmare, this part has, well, this is more GPU limited than the base game due to the extra effects on screen. And, well, more NPCs and stuff. But there's less going on when it comes to CPU. There's no stores, there's less NPCs roaming around. It's more of a deserted moment, which, I mean, makes complete sense. It's a zombie apocalypse at the end of the day. In this case, I'd say it's a better experience in general to play Undead Nightmare over the base game, just due to the fact that we are GPU bound most of the way through. And on the base game, you need to do more stuff when it comes to CPU operations, to say it in some way. Before I continue, I'm going to show you frame gen because you guys always ask for it. First, unlock the frame rate, go into side menu, disable frame limit. After you disable the frame limit, make sure in OptiScaler, the thing that we set up before, that the frame gen is FSR4 via Nukem's DLSSG. This should be like that by default. So now you can actually use frame gen from the game's menu. In order for this to unlock, you need to enable reflex low latency, NVIDIA Reflex. Enable it, apply the changes. We're at 95 FPS right now. With frame gen we're getting 140. But again, remember that this is half the frame rate that you're seeing there. But with such a high frame rate as a base, it should be good enough. Manual GPU clock, let's keep it at 1100. That should be good enough to keep the frame gen consistent without the CPU taking over. And let's see how it goes. Okay, I can definitely notice the input lag, but it's not bad. I'd say it's completely playable like this. And why in this case I say it feels good? Well, the base frame rate is pretty high already. The base frame rate is into the 50s and 60s, so it's not the same as other games like UE5 stuff, that you have a base frame rate of 20 something and you are frame generating that to over 30. It's a completely different situation here. You can actually see the smoothness, feel the input lag if you played it without frame gen, but it's not unplayable by any means. I can still feel like the game is quite responsive. Obviously, in comparison to no frame gen, there's more input lag, but still, it's an option. If you want to use it, it works. Just expect more input lag, which is obvious, we are doing frame gen. So yeah, as long as you're fine with some extra input lag, if your base frame rate is 50 to 60, it should be decent enough, especially if you've never played the game before. Alright, so we looked at the quote-unquote performance settings. Let's do a quality setting. This will be targeting the 40 FPS range, which unfortunately is not a frame rate cap in here, but you can do it from this menu on the Steam Deck. The settings here are basically almost the highest. The only thing that is not on the highest is shadow quality. That's on high. Then DLSS on DLAA with FSR4. And I lowered these sliders a tiny bit, something like this. And if we open this menu, as you can probably see, we have FSR4. Make sure to hit change upscaler once you change this one. RCAS with motion adaptive sharpness at 0.334 and 15 of motion range. This one is at 0. And make sure not to touch the sharpness, otherwise I got a black screen, also with contrast enabled. These two, contrast enable and override, ignore this if you're using motion adaptive sharpness, otherwise the game will be a black screen the next time you launch it, which was pretty annoying when I first got that. And again, to be able to enable that, we're using the DLSS. We're basically taking this hostage and replacing it with FSR4 at native resolution to get the best image quality. And we're here in Blackwater. Blackwater is where I drop frames the most, basically in every version of this game. That happened on the PS3 back in the day. It also happens sometimes on PS4. But this is the CPU heavy area. But if you log it to 40, it should be good 99% of the time. So yeah, that's when it drops the most for me, generally speaking. But again, this is the quality mode, because we're basically trying to get the best graphics possible. Those spikes are mostly CPU limitation. But we get the best graphics and image quality. I mean, it's an old game, don't get me wrong, it also runs on phones, but this is way above what the phones are doing, when it comes to the settings at least. So yeah, a 40 FPS cap with these settings I think is ideal, and you're getting native resolution, so that's another thing. But again, the upscaler is very aggressive when it comes to performance. FSR4 is a big hit. So yeah, but hey, it is what it is. And this will give you basically on the OLED a couple hours of battery, on the LCD 1.5 hours maybe, but it could vary, maybe 2.5 on the OLED with the FPS lock at 40. And we need to get to the cemetery. One thing that you'll notice in comparison to ultra shadows is that the torch sometimes doesn't cast shadows. It's kind of a weird bug. Or maybe it's just, yeah, if you look at it, when the camera is close, I do have a shadow. But if I move it a little bit away, it disappears. On the ultra setting, that doesn't happen. But the ultra setting is very demanding when it comes to shadows. So if you don't mind about that and you want to play at 30 FPS, you can put ultra shadows to keep all those torch shadows up. Although you use the torch only for these cemetery missions. That's when you're going to notice it the most. We'll see once we get into the horde and all that stuff, but generally speaking, we're good. Because in Undead Nightmare, we're more GPU limited than CPU limited. So that's a big plus, because in the base game, the biggest issue I ran into was usually CPU related. Alright, so now I'm going to show you handheld, how it looks when you're playing it on the Steam Deck itself. Because I think with the raw footage from the capture card, obviously if you look at it on a bigger screen, it's not going to look great, because we're talking about a portable device. But this is more to show you what it looks like with XeSS in the smaller screen, because we could see the haloing around John Marston. Here I'm not honestly noticing it. I mean, kinda, if I'm looking at it very, very closely. But honestly, I think with these settings, it looks fantastic, it performs great, and the edges are way better than using FSR4 or FXAA or anything in-game. Obviously, you need the mod in order to get a result like this, which is kind of the point of the video. The best way to play Red Dead 1 when it comes to visuals and performance on Steam Deck. So yeah, it does work, it feels fantastic, and I'm convinced that this is the best way to play the game, at least on Steam Deck. So yeah, my advice for this game is to inject XeSS, or if you don't care about performance, FSR4. You get a super crisp image, you get very consistent 50 to 60 FPS. Usually the drops in performance are when you are getting into a town on horseback. That's basically it. There's no beating around the bush on this one. It's pretty simple to notice, especially again when entering to one of the first places. It's immediately noticeable, but it gets even worse if you are using the maximum draw distance. That's why I recommend lowering it. The game looks, I mean, still looks great. The draw distance is completely fine. I don't think it's obviously downgraded, like it happens with other games when you lower the settings. But I'm convinced that this is the best way to play the game. Yeah, it requires some setup manually, but once you do so, I think it looks fantastic. It was easier to come to this conclusion after playing the Switch 2 version, which is 60 FPS with DLSS, and DLSS destroys FSR4 and FXAA on this game pretty much across the board. So that's why I was inspired to make this video, to make it even better than it already was on Steam Deck, at least when it comes to image stability. When it comes to battery life, more like 2.5 to 3 hours on the OLED, 1.5 to 2 hours on the LCD, and you can also enable HDR if you want to on the Steam Deck OLED. So yeah, the main issue that I notice is that sometimes if I enable certain options in this menu, I'm going to get a black screen and I cannot enter the game. In order to fix that, I had to uninstall the plugin on the game itself by using a command, disabling DLSS and enabling FSR4, restart the game again with the mod enabled, and then I could disable sharpening and get back to playing the game. That's annoying. That can be game breaking for many people that don't know about it, which is a shame. But then outside of that, and the sky sometimes flickering with a black texture, that it happens like for a few seconds. That happened a couple of times in this video, if you were noticing. Those are the issues. Other than that, the game feels great. Another thing that I would recommend in this game is to download a mod that disables the intro logos, so you get dropped right into the menu without going through the Rockstar logo, the developer's logo and all that. Just save a few seconds, just a thing that I like doing. So yeah, there you go. Best way to play Red Dead 1 on Steam Deck. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did revisiting this freaking classic that I still cannot fathom that I can play on the go. I played this on a PS3 that used like 300 to 400 watts and a big TV. Now I can do it basically anywhere. So technology is fantastic. Happy New Year and have a good one. See you guys. Thanks for watching.